Welcome to Aspire, and I Have the Right To podcast, where we amplify voices, share stories, and drive change in the fight against sexual assault. We explore the critical issues surrounding student safety, institutional accountability, and survivor empowerment. In every episode, our goal is to provide insightful conversations with survivors, experts, educators, and advocates, giving you, our listener, valuable information, resources, and actionable steps to create safer environments and cultivate a culture of respect and consent. Welcome back to another episode of Aspire, Real Men, Real Conversations. Today's guest is someone who speaks with honesty, compassion, and intellectual depth about some of the most important questions facing young men today: identity, loneliness, suffering, faith, masculinity, and what it truly means to live a meaningful life. John Stanczak is an educator at Seton Hall University, writer, and thoughtful voice on the emotional and spiritual lives of young people. In a culture that often teaches boys to suppress emotion, avoid vulnerability, and man up, John challenges us to rethink strength itself. His recent article, How to Build a Faith That's Sturdy Enough for Real Life, explores the idea that real joy is not the absence of suffering, but the courage to remain open, connected, and fully human through it. At I Have the Right To, we often talk about aspirational masculinity, the belief that true masculinity is rooted not in domination or performance, but in empathy, accountability, courage, and connection. John's work speaks directly into that conversation. So, John, thank you for joining us on Aspire.
Thanks very much, Alex. Great to see you.
Excellent. Well, if I can, John, just for the sake of our audience, because you do have an interesting, role, and you talk about some very interesting topics. But can you explain to us the journey that you've had to sort of travel to get to the place you are, now, but also why these topics were ones that really drove your interest and curiosity?
Sure, absolutely. So I've spent a long time, I think, inside the mind and architecture of the teenage boy. I was obviously a teenage boy once myself, but I went to an all-boys high school, an all-boys Jesuit high school, and my entire career, save for the first 3 years, I've worked in all-boys high schools. I've taught, I've coached. I was for close to 15 years a principal of an all-boys high school, and I currently serve as the chair of the theology department at Seton Hall Prep, and I teach philosophy. So I've been around teenage boys for a long time. I wrote my master's thesis in theology, which is really my first area on male spirituality. So I've spent a lot of time in that type of space. But one of the things over time that has happened is I've dealt for much of my adult life. I've lived with depression and anxiety, and around COVID. We certainly saw a lot of young people struggling with mental health issues, and that kind of coincided with a sense within me that I really needed to be doing more in terms of sharing my story with my students and sharing my story with others about men's mental health. And the first part of that was really just speaking out more, being candid with my students, having more conversations with them about where they were in their mental health, where they were in their development as young men, sharing with them stories of mistakes that I had made and how I had grown over time. And I began to find that those conversations really began to be a lot of the work that I was doing in the classroom. And I found that a lot of the guys were really hungry for having those conversations. They were looking to talk about how they were feeling. They were looking for opportunities to be vulnerable and talk about their feelings. And I was really taken by that. I think a lot of times we kind of misunderstand that, young boys want to be, they're kind of stoic and they're quiet, and you ask them questions and they kind of grunt and nod. But I think if you create some space there, you find that there's really a lot more on their mind. And that led to maybe a final part of the journey, which around that time, as I really wanted to learn more about about these types of issues, I began engaging in graduate work in happiness studies. I got a master's degree in happiness studies and positive psychology, and I'm currently pursuing a PhD in that area. And I work under a guy named Tal Ben-Shahar, who was a professor at Harvard, who started a course in happiness studies at Harvard. And like a lot of these courses that you hear about, it was dynamite. I mean, all of a sudden, it was the most popular course at Harvard, and every student there wanted to take it. And I'm fortunate now to study underneath Tal, but it just really spoke even more. And that's going on elsewhere. That's going on with Laurie Santos at Yale and a lot of these places that young people want to talk about what's going on. Where are they? How do they find a better life? How do they flourish? How do they kind of begin to recognize the important things that are going on for them. So that kind of brought me to where I am today. I think most recently, the work I've done is a lot of writing. I have a Substack that I keep where I write 3 essays a week that really deal at the intersection of flourishing, men's mental health, and culture. And I just recently published a book that was just released 2 weeks ago. That's called Letters to Owen, What Manhood Requires of Us. And it's really a collection of letters to my son, but really to all the young men that I've taught and will teach, to try to throw, my voice into the discussion of, what does it mean to be a good man? And I think for a lot of the young men at least that I'm teaching these days, there's a lot of messaging out there coming from the manosphere, coming from kind of these online loud voices. And I don't think that a lot of it is really good advice for young men. I think they've tapped into where young men are. I think they understand that young men are lonely. I think they understand that young men are kind of dealing with a lot of emotions and a lot of questions about, what kind of man do I want to be? And I think a bit of a vacuum has been created that allows some of these voices really more credibility than they deserve. So I just wanted to add my voice to some of those voices as kind of a counterbalance to say, hey, listen, there's more than just what you're hearing online. So that kind of brought me. That's kind of I don't know if that's a long story or short story of how I got to where I am today.
No, that's wonderful. And I want to pivot to my co-host this evening, Jonas Wall. And Jonas, this is the first time we've done a podcast together. So I would love it first if you would introduce yourself, to our audience. And then I would love to get your thoughts on what John just walked through, since, you're one of the people that I think John is trying to reach, through this work, given the fact that you are a young man who's growing and evolving and at university now.
Of course. My name is Jonas Wall. I am a college freshman at the University of Delaware. I am a student intern with I Have the Right To, and in terms of what John just said, I can completely agree with that. We have a course similar to what you just said, happiness studies. I think like the science of well-being at UD. It fills up every semester. I think people do want to be happy, and they want to figure out how to be happy. And normally, it's not always a straight path to get there. And for myself too, as a teenage boy myself, I know that happiness isn't the same for everybody. There's always a different path that everybody has to take, and it's really about finding what works for you. And talking about your journey, was there any personal experience that forced you to rethink what faith or strength actually meant to you?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones was, I had mentioned that I was a principal of a boys' Catholic high school for a long time, for close to 15 years. And during that journey, probably, year 12 or so, I started to get a little burnt out, and I found that the job wasn't giving me the same kind of fulfillment that it had, and there were a lot of reasons for that. I think at heart I'm a teacher, and the administrative part of the job had gotten to be very heavy, and we're building buildings and all these things, and I began to become very burnt out and kind of unhappy, and it really left me at sea a little bit, saying, here I am, I'm approaching 50, I'm not terribly happy in my job right now, but what am I supposed to do? It was a prestigious job. It was a job that made me a decent living. I had 2 kids at home, my wife, But it really began eating away at me more and more and more until my wife finally said to me, listen, you've got to make a change. I mean, this is just not where you are right now. And it was terrifying. I mean, it's terrifying to be a man at 50 years old and trying to figure out, what next. Um, so I just kind of walked away from it, and I said, I'm going to go back to the classroom. That's where I've really been happiest. I was very lucky to have a lot of friends in education. One of whom immediately said, "Listen, come teach with me. Come teach at my place," and I've been thrilled ever since. I've been at Seton Hall Prep for 8 years now. It's been 8 amazing years. It's created all sorts of opportunities for me to explore new things that I wanted to do. But I tell my students that story because it was terrifying, right? I mean, I think for Jonas, I don't envy you because I think you probably get a lot of people saying to you, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? What are you studying? What do you plan to do? And I teach primarily seniors in high school, so they're kind of at the same place, and that's a scary question, right? And I think we've kind of given young men the message that if you don't have it all figured out by the time you're 19 years old, man, you're behind the game a little bit. And I just don't think that's just not the case. There's plenty of time in life to kind of pivot, to grow, to learn, to switch gears. I'm very open with my students about some of the times of my life where I've had to do that because I just want to reassure them that that's okay. The part of being human is that sometimes in life you say, I've got to change, I've got to grow, I've got to let go of things that are not life giving, and I've got to pursue some things that are more life giving for me.
So, John, you mentioned that you had this extended period in terms of being sort of the administrative leader of a school, and
Yeah,
then, probably coming back into the classroom with, I imagine, a different mindset, energy, level of experience or perspective.
yeah,
Um, and having now spent sort of 8 years at Seton Hall Prep, um, what are the things that you've picked up from the boys? Because a lot has changed over the last, 8 years, right? I think
yeah,
we had probably longer term stability before that, but then, we've had COVID, we've had, so much disruption and change, difference in learning, so many explosive social, movements that I think have raised the consciousness and, like you said, a much greater awareness of the importance of mental health and well-being. How have you been informed over this time at Seton Hall Prep and, helped you shape your understanding of the most updated version of masculinity?
yeah. I think there's a few things. One in happiness studies, one of the things that has been shown time and time and time again is that the key to a happy life and the key to a flourishing life is relationships. And when we look at even these places that are called blue zones, right, where we see people who are living the longevity, the living long lives, what we find that they have in common is quality, strong relationships. And I think as I look at the last 10 years, that may be one of the areas that has become most at risk for young people. I think. I hate to be join in the chorus of people blaming everything on social media, but I think social media has kind of readjusted the nature of relationships. I think we've moved from real intimate relationships to more anonymous kind of online casual relationship. I think the social media world has created a lot of tribalism, and I think political turmoil over the last 15 years has created some tribalism. Where we see people rather than coming together, becoming more isolated within their own tribe, and I see that among young people. Less the political end of it, but more just just sitting and talking to another person is kind of a lost art for them. Communication is done digitally and through Snapchat and through Instagram. Well, let me give you an example. We have a retreat every year at Seton Hall, several times a year for juniors and seniors called the Kairos Retreat, a religious retreat. It's a week long. Great. Every student who goes to Seton Hall Prep says it's the highlight of their career. And one of the things that's really awesome about the Kairos retreat is the minute they show up, we take their phones away, right? And they go for the whole week without their phones. And at the end of the week, we're getting on the bus, we give them the phones back. And a lot of guys say, man, how refreshing it was to be away from my phone for that period of time and just talk to other people. I mean, they love it, right? I mean, we've created a world in which that's harder for them to do, but one of the things they say is so powerful is that, man, I love that just being able to talk to people instead of, constantly looking at phones and sitting at lunch and people looking at their phones. So I think that kind of relational end of it has shifted. I think the other thing that comes out of Kairos that I always think about, I just had a conversation with my seniors about it. And I said, what is it about that experience that you think is so powerful? And almost every one of them used the same word, and that word was vulnerability. They said, boy, it was so great to be vulnerable and to talk with other guys about the, real things in my life. Um, and I think, again, social media has kind of a performative aspect to it that almost mitigates against any kind of vulnerability. I mean, if anything, you're trying to show your best self, right? You're on Instagram and kind of curating your life for people to see, and it's taken away those opportunities for vulnerability that only happen, person to person. And guys, I mean, it is obvious to anybody who spends time with high school boys that they want it. They're dying for it, and they're looking for places to find it.
So Jonas, I'm again going to pivot back to you on that one. Have you ever had in the last several years an experience or an opportunity to put the device away and um, what has been sort of the result of that, or if not, what do you think of what John just walked through with the Kairos process? And by the way, my youngest daughter went through Kairos program at her school in DC
Mm,
here. And again, watching all the kids come back and welcoming them back into the community, you could see it was life-changing for all the young people that participated, in it.
yeah.
It's a wonderful thing.
So I actually have, when I was in high school, I had a 2-week summer camp in Vermont for music, where there was no phones. We were on this like beautiful lakefront, like a property, and it was just music for 2 weeks. It was amazing, and obviously our phones were taken from us. And I think it was so instrumental in. It seems like cliche to say, but like connecting with nature, just like listening to everything around you. I think it's really kind of a lost art. And like so now, when I'm in my college years, I'm so much busier. Like I don't want to say that I need my phone in the sense that I'm always texting people, I'm always arranging things, but like I feel like society has gotten so dependent on digital communications to the point where we just can't do anything without it. And I think I would love to go on a week long retreat without my phone, but I would come back to like 1 million missed emails, a million missed texts, the world's ending. I'm like, "Ugh, I just can't do that." Um, and sometimes I feel like fragmented because I just have so many parts of different places. So my question for you, John, would be: we're talking about a complete man. What qualities do you think defines a complete man?
Wow. Yeah, that's a big question. I think I think, we often think of manhood with some of the same terms of strength and leadership and those kinds of things. And I think those words are okay. I think those words still work, but I think we have to kind of ask ourselves, I think men should be strong, but strong in what way? Strong in a way that dominates, or strong in a way that has the courage to kind of be emotional and to be human and to apologize and to forgive. I think those are, the kinds of strong qualities that we're looking for. I think, we often talk about men as being protectors, right? But again, I think that's a word that can kind of go in two different directions. Does protector mean that you're kind of the dominator of your family, or does it mean that you protect all people? That wherever you see injustice, or wherever you see people on the margins, or wherever you see, somebody who's in need, are you willing to step out of yourself and to kind of, protect the rights, protect the agency of women, protect, those who, protect the poor. We talk about leadership, and again, does leadership only mean, well, I'm going to be the guy who takes charge, and I'm going to be the guy who kind of orders everybody around, or do we lead by example, and do we say, I'm going to be the guy who's the first one to step out of line to help somebody. I always say to the guys at school, I mean, you see a freshman drop his books, are you going to be the guy who steps out and says, like, listen, I'm gonna it's strange to even say risk your reputation, but it is. Am I going to risk my reputation? Am I going to be the guy who steps outside of myself? That's leadership, right? I mean, that's something that other guys look at. And I think, there's lots of ways that can be cultivated. I think it's all just a matter of, are we cultivating it in the best possible ways among young people? So I think, the kind of the old words of strength and leadership and those words still work. I think I would add to them vulnerability. That's a word that I think we don't think of enough. To be able to be present to our emotions and to recognize that our emotions are human emotions, to be able to apologize, to be able to grieve, to be able to kind of recognize that people around me need me in ways that are emotional rather than just transactional. So yeah, I mean, I could probably go on and on. I think there's a lot of adjectives we could use that probably the world needs a lot more of. So
Yeah, so maybe I'll jump in there with trying to push further on this, because I think, what you just described were, whether it's speaking up, which requires an action, right? A thought process and then an action, um, or even, being vulnerable, which also means, in my mind, showing vulnerability and expressing it is
mhm.
also an active stance that you take in action. But so much of our, society and the training for men has been, you know, stoicism
Yeah,
and the concept of suffering in silence. Um, and I think that silence is something that is, for most men, a deep, deep comfort zone. Um, and so, in the practical world that you're operating, John, as being sort of a leader of boys and setting examples for them, what are some of the things that we can do, or that you do, that we can learn from, in terms of getting them to embrace that vulnerability, which requires strength, right? Or speaking up rather than, maintaining that, stoic posture, or being silent through seeing transgressions.
yeah. So the first thing is, I think we did that to them. I think if you go past a first grade or second grade classroom and you see young boys in school, their hands are all raised, they're climbing out of their seats, they're talking, they're eager to engage, they're yelling out answers, and somewhere along the way we kind of train them to say, well, that's not appropriate. You got to quiet down. You got to, so if the first thing is, I think if we did it to them, we can undo it. I think that's the first part of it. I think I don't think that's the default setting for young boys or for young men, that they are stoic. I think that's a learned behavior that we've given them, and I think what we need to do is we need to model for them, through fathers and coaches and teachers who are who don't feel the need to hide their emotions, and we need to say to young boys, think of how many times we kind of use the language with young boys, like when they cry, hey, come on, big boys don't cry, or, toughen it up, walk it off, and kind of all the things that we do to try to suppress their emotions. I think there's a lot of work to be done, but I think we have to start undoing some of that work. And I think that just comes with accepting that boys have emotions, and it's absolutely normal for them to want to express those emotions, and we've got to give them the room and the space to do that. We've got to model for them what that looks like. And frankly, when I speak with my own students about things like mental health, or periods of my life that have been difficult, I think that's what I can see their shoulders drop as I'm talking about these things, that they have permission now. They have permission with me to talk about these things. We need to create, kind of spaces for them to do that. I think a Kairos retreat is 4 days of their life, but we need to, when they talk about vulnerability, I say, guys, wouldn't it be great if you could be like that with your friends all the time?
Yep.
If you had other guys that you could share, not in mawkish ways, but just to, to be able to talk with your friends about things that are hurtful to you, things that you're frightened about. I think it's a matter of creating spaces and providing the modeling for them to be able to do that. I think, I think the manosphere reinforces it. I wrote an article a few weeks ago, in which, I've started to use the word broicism, for this stoicism. And as somebody who teaches philosophy, I can tell you that some of these guys online who talk about stoicism have it all wrong. I mean, they've kind of twisted what can be, I think, a very positive approach to life into something. I don't know that Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus or any of these people said that we should just shut up and swallow our emotions. I think the goal was, can we regulate our emotions so that they don't distract us from pursuing virtue and the better things in life? I think we've cut off that last piece. Excuse me. So I think a lot of guys online say, well, stoicism is about, hiding your emotions, when really I think a better approach would be to say, it's about regulating our emotions so that we can kind of grieve when it's appropriate to grieve. We can cry when it's appropriate to cry. We can be strong when it's appropriate to be strong. And all of that whole range of emotions is part of the human experience. I think we've just got to do a much better job of modeling that. And I'm fortunate. Look, I work with a lot of grown men who do a great job of that. And coaches and teachers and counselors. And I think it's just about helping them recognize that.
So, John, I've had the benefit of being invited into your community and coming in to Seton Hall Prep and spending, a good part of a day with the students. And, I could see, the courage of the institution in bringing in, difficult conversations that maybe the students don't have on a regular basis, meaning having a dad of a survivor coming in and speaking about, um, what masculinity means in the context of gender-based violence or sexual violence, um, and seeing some wonderful conversations evolve with the student body. So I can see, the fruits of the work that you have done. So I want to ask this as an example for other, schools. How do we institutionalize this across the board? Because I do agree with you 1,000%. The role of fathers, the role of coaches, the role of other teachers is so critical to sort of see the consistent modeling, across the board. But just as you mentioned, many dads are guilty of saying, "Hey, son, suck it up. Don't cry.
Sure.
Boys don't cry." And coaches will go and tell their, athletes, you know, take, that take what you deserve. Take what that ball belongs to you. Grabbing someone by the face mask and saying, don't show weakness.
Yeah.
Um, and but, sort of truly understanding the power and the strength around being whole and bringing that wholeness to whatever role we have to play during the day, whether it's a caretaker, whether it's an athlete looking to compete, whether it's a student looking to perform and learn academically, etc. But are there any lessons that you've seen to say, what are the ways that we can build this into the fabric so our young people can sort of see this almost 24/7?
Yeah, I think, one of the things you mentioned that I think could be a great entree for young men is sports, right? You were an athlete, and I was an athlete back in the day, and I coached sports, and I think that sports can be, I think, a real place of helping young men learn how to manage their emotions well, because it's an emotional experience for them, right? It's for young guys who are involved in sports. It's probably an area where they experience a full range of emotions, from elation over scoring a touchdown to, grief over losing a championship game, to fear, to vulnerability, to being out there on the mound in the bottom of the last inning, so I think it's an area where, we have the opportunity to begin to address, that's okay that you feel all of those things, and it's okay to feel those things without thinking that it makes you, quote, less of a man or makes you less of a competitor. I think you can compete and be an emotional player. Plenty of guys have done it. I think we see professional athletes oftentimes who are in touch with their emotions. who are able to cry, who are able to grieve, and and I think if we can kind of, I'm a big believer in use whatever material is there. I think, find young men where they are, and kind of look at what's going on there and see what's there that can be built upon, that can be something that's life giving for them. So I think sports is a great opportunity to do that. So, maybe educating coaches, or having more conversations with coaches about how we do that in meaningful ways. And look, I'm not, I love sports, and I think sometimes when you say things like this, people say, well, we don't want to turn the football team into some kind of crying drum circle. That's not what I'm talking about. I think just recognizing that, hey, when you're competing, there's a lot of emotions that are going through your body, and that's okay. And you can express that. It's okay to say you're afraid. If you're going out on a football field and you're not a little bit anxious or afraid, you're just not being honest with yourself. And can coaches model some of that behavior? And where I've seen coaches do that, again, I think it's, anytime young guys look at a man in their life and that man exposes himself in emotionally powerful ways, you see the shoulders drop, and you can see it happen, that, okay, I've been given permission to do this too. So I think that modeling of doing so is so important within schools. And I think part of that is, you're asking practical things, of, getting coaches together to talk about, just as you would with teachers, to have faculty meetings and things like that. How many ADs are getting all their coaches together and talking about, like, hey, how do we do these things with our play? Are we concerned about the overall wellness of our athletes, and how can we together find ways to do that? Um, One of the things that Seton Hall has a great tradition of is many of our athletic programs are involved in service activities, and I think that's a great way to do it. Our baseball team does a lot of work with developmentally delayed young people, and I think it's a great way for them to have the experience of saying, as a team, we go out on the field. As a team, we win and lose, but also as a team, we serve. And also as a team, we pray. And also as a team, we eat together and we talk together. And I think the more occasions you can create for that, I think goes a long way.
I completely agree, and I was also an athlete all 4 years of high school. I ran cross country, indoor track, outdoor track, and, running taught me the ideas of, hey, if you're in pain, sometimes you have to say something. It's not always in your head. Um, and I just feel like many young men today, maybe they feel like they just don't have the words to express themselves. So, do you think that many young men are actually emotionally numb, or have they simply just not been given the language to actually describe what they feel?
I think they haven't been given the language. I think that they're not emotionally numb because I see them turn it on. I see them go to it when we go on a Kairos retreat. I see it when we talk about things in the classroom. I teach we have a program at the school teaching students mental health first aid, how they can kind of recognize warning signs in their classmates. And I teach those courses, and I see it in there. I think, a lot of it, I know I sound, like a broken record, but I think a lot of it is giving them the permission and the space to do it, because I think they want it. I think they desperately want it. And I think that, that's why some of these guys on the internet are able to attract the following that they have, is because they say, I see your feelings. I see that you have these feelings, and I'm going to help you voice those. But what they do is they voice it as anger. They voice it as resentment. They help them voice it in the form of tribalism. They're giving them a place to come together and talk about how they're feeling, except they're twisting that. They're twisting that into looks maxing, and they're twisting that into kind of this Andrew Tate form of stoicism, uh, because they recognize that guys do want a place to live in that space. What I think we need to do is we need to create better, healthier spaces for them to be able to do that, because I think it is very much what they want.
So how do you do that at Seton Hall Prep in terms of those, spaces? Is it, through the curriculum and through the course that you teach? Are there other times or spaces that, you can, convene that? Because one of the there are a couple of obstacles I'd like to talk to you about, but
Mm,
one is the obstacle of time, right?
yeah.
And the challenge of any educator in terms of squeezing everything into, the day. And given the rising awareness of the impact of mental health on young people, but especially our young boys, and how they feel disconnected, and how they feel isolated, and that sort of impact, and evidenced by suicide rates and
Mm.
disconnections, and et cetera, et cetera. Um, is there a new model that we need to look at? And what are your thoughts, on that?
Yeah, one of the things that we've done of late, which I think has been helpful, is how do you look at the ethos of a school? When you're at all boys schools, I think every all boys school on the face of the earth, centers itself around this idea of brotherhood. And I think that one of the things that schools would do well to look at is, how are we defining that term? What does that mean for us? Is brotherhood just, let's get everybody to the lacrosse game on Tuesday night? Is it just, kind of circle the wagon type of brotherhood? And I think to give the school community the language of how we're going to talk about that. So we just went through our reaccreditation process at Seton Hall Prep. And one of the things that we focus on, or the thing really that we focused on, and we've got a great assistant headmaster, Dave Snyder, who's an alum of the school, was very big on this. The school's motto is hazards at forward. So despite obstacles, we keep moving ahead. And we focused our whole reaccreditation project around, what does that mean? What does that mean for us as an institution? And what kinds of values and virtues does that call us to? And we began to identify a lot of the virtues that we wanted out of young people, things like resilience, and what would that look like? Things like creating a growth mentality, not being afraid to make mistakes, being vulnerable in learning. And then, they kind of went to every teacher through faculty meetings and so forth and said, come up with a plan of how you think you can do this in your classroom. And sometimes it's in very small ways. One of my colleagues, said, "Hey, I always use, we have online grade books or whatever. I always use the comment sections to let guys know, what they've done wrong. I'm going to start using that to let guys know what they're doing right." And eat something little like that, I think changes the weather a little bit in a building. It starts becoming more of an idea that, hey, we're here to grow, and we're here to kind of look out for one another. And brotherhood in the context of hazards at forward means that we don't only look out for each other at our best. We look out for each other when there are opportunities for growth. We look out at how can we help the guy next to us be resilient? How can we look at the guy next to us who has failed and help him see that as an opportunity to grow, rather than now you're less of a man, or you're less than, or in some way. So I think, on kind of this macro level, it's about creating a climate or a culture within the school that that fosters that type of understanding of what brotherhood means, and how we look out for one another. And then you try to get that, even into the math classroom, or the history classroom. How can we do that in small ways that create opportunities for growth for guys?
Yeah, and I love the word in that saying, despite obstacles, we move forward. The word that I love the most within that saying is the we.
Yeah.
Um, and I also see, through our advocacy work, John, we started our advocacy work just supporting our daughter who'd been victimized by sexual violence. And the we back then was my wife and I and our three daughters, but particularly my daughter who had been sexually assaulted. And and then understanding that we were isolated and surrounded by silence and shame and blame, and the we was very small, but the we kept on growing as we, sustained ourselves. And I sort of imagined the same thing. I think I closed my talk to the boys with just telling them, the seniors, how they were going out into the world outside of the protected walls of Seton Hall, but they all had the opportunity to be the purveyors or ambassadors of that, to expand, that we going forward.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I want to touch on a conversation briefly on another component of the we, because we talked about teachers or coaches. Um, Now, parents. Um, I've had an educator at one school tell me when the head of the school talked about our kind of programming coming into the school, the father, in a very macho way, declared, "Listen, your job is to get my kid into Yale. My job is to teach my kid how to be a man." And,
Mm.
which made me sort of tremble, right? Um, but, you know, I understand that, you know, um, parents can be sort of understanding, allies in this, or they can also be obstacles because as you started out by saying, we, the collective we, us adults, have implanted this in our kids, right?
Yeah.
Um, Subconsciously, consciously, who really knows? But what is your hope, um, or what is your view of the current state of where parents are in this journey with all of us, right? And what is your hope for parents going forward?
Yeah, just this morning, I posted an article I had written on Substack, that has a couple things that maybe I can address here. The first is, listen, I'm a parent myself. I've made plenty of mistakes with my kids, and I certainly don't mean this to denigrate parents in any way, but I can tell you that I've been working with teenage boys for 35 years, and where I've been teaching seniors, I ask them every year, I say, listen, how many of you have had a conversation with your parents about sexuality? And I don't mean a passing comment or somebody, your father left a condom on the bed or something. I mean a sit down over time conversation about bodies and women and relationships. We're still in the single digits of guys who say I have had that conversation at home. Right now, these are guys that are going to college next year, right, Jonas? These are guys. This is guys that now are going off to a place where they're going to have, a lot less, a lot more opportunity for sexual activity. There's going to be a lot more kind of cultural pressure that sexual activity now is the time, college, and we're just not really giving them any education. So you have this in between, and I don't know that I have answers, but it is a source of frustration because you will get parents who say, I don't want the schools teaching my kids about sexuality. That's my job. But then when you ask the kids, that's not being done at home. So what we've done is nobody has done it now. And so again, that vacuum is filled by other guys. It's filled by the locker room. It's filled by online personalities. It's filled by, just kind of cultural myth about what masculinity is. And nobody's having these conversations with them. So, I would love it if, and I think schools need to do the work to get parents on board and maybe to have some of these discussions. Say, listen, if you're concerned about what we're doing, and let's have those discussions about how we can work together to do this, to give the types of information that they need. Um, and I'm not only talking about, just how the body works. I'm talking about, what it means to love a human being, and what it means to be emotionally vulnerable, and what it means about, consent and agency, and all of those things. I just, I don't want to be a downer, but I just think those conversations just aren't happening. We kind of think they are. It's sort of this, this blind spot that we have where we think somebody else is doing it, and it's just not getting done. So I think that's a big part of it. How do we get parents involved in the conversation without it seeming antagonistic or adversarial, but saying, listen, we're all in this together. The other, I think there's a couple other pieces to that. I think we also need to be more attentive to how we speak to young people about sexuality when we do. And here's what I mean by that. I think sometimes even our best efforts can be counterproductive. And I'll give you a big shout out here, Alex, because when you came to Seton Hall Prep, you said something that I said, this guy is dynamite. This is right on. You said, how do you think I felt when this happened to Cassie, and the guy said, "You furious, angry, you wanted to kill the guy, you just strangle him with your bare hands." I said, "Yeah, I felt all of those things, but then I realized that's about me, though. That doesn't do anything to help my daughter. Those are feelings that are about me, and I need to recenter, my feelings about this." And that I got to tell you, that's one of the most powerful things I've heard said in a high school auditorium, because usually what happens in a high school auditorium is you have a speaker come in to talk about sexuality, and it's like a purity or chastity talk, and the whole talk is about. And we had a guy just a couple of years ago come to the school, and he says, "Hey, listen, if you're out there fooling around with some girl, that's some other guy's future wife, or that's some guy's sister, or that you're defiling now." And they have these little metaphors where they say, "Imagine, if a piece of tape, and if this girl, I keep sticking this tape to different ones. By the time it gets to you, it doesn't. That's what a girl's virginity is like." And you say, "Man." Talk about a terrible message to send. This whole discussion is framed in terms of women are the possession of men, and really the problem with sexuality is that women are supposed to be on defense, defending their virginity, and men are like ravenous wolves, and really it's the woman's job to kind of fend us off. I mean, that's kind of the way the world works. Men are the aggressors, and women need to. And if a woman is violated, the first question is not, why didn't the man control himself? The first question is, well, what were you wearing? Were you drinking? Have you been sexually active with anybody else? So I think when we talk about I think we need to get parents on board. I think we need to be more conscious of who are we having come in to speak to young people about sexuality. Um, what is within the Catholic faith, what is the church saying about women and about sexuality, and is that feeding into some of these ideas of possession that men have about women? Is that removing agency and autonomy from women? So the we that you talk about, Alex, I think is a big we. I think there's a lot of. I think and it's not going to work unless somehow, and I don't even pretend to know where to begin with this. Somehow we can kind of get everybody on the same board in terms of messaging of
Well,
these
the one
ideas.
thing I can say to that, despite obstacles, we move forward, right, John?
Mm, That's right.
Which,
That's right.
and that's why I love that. But I have to turn it back to our teenage co-host here on this one, given John what you just mentioned, and I tried to give you a little bit warning in our chat here, Jonas. But tell us have you had the benefit of any conversations with your parents or any trusted adults about sexuality and relationships? And if yes, did you find them sort of helpful? If not, would you have liked to have had some or would you like to have some going forward to sort of help prepare you for reality?
In terms of my parents, definitely not. Love them to death, but they definitely don't talk about this. I don't know exactly. I don't think it's their like shortcomings necessarily. I wouldn't describe it as that, but I think people approach the subject with too much fear. I think the most exposure I got to it was a semester of sex ed in high school, which really didn't do anything. It was like, oh, put this condom over a wooden, model of a penis. I'm like, what is that going to do to help me in life? I wanted to talk about what it's really helping men, what's helping women, was uplifting all of us. And I just felt like whenever there was like healthy examples of masculinity or femininity in the room, they were never being uplifted. So I guess my question for you would be, what are some examples of healthy masculine traits that you think we should actually celebrate more, that I just feel like are not being celebrated enough right now?
Wow. Yeah, that's great. I think I think first of all, consent. When we talk about consent, I think consent has to be. We have to start thinking of it as the ground floor, not the ceiling that we need to get to. So I think for men, we've got to get to a place where they recognize the mutuality of a relationship. Uh, at every step of the relationship, right? That this is a relationship is between two human people, each with their own anxieties and fears and reality and life and personhood. It's not a contest. Women are not a trophy or a conquest. It's a relationship between two people. And like any relationship, like any healthy relationship between two people, there has to be mutual respect. There has to be conversation. There has to be listening. I think probably, I don't know if this is a stereotypical thing to say. I think just speaking for myself, I'm a notoriously bad listener. My wife tells me that all the time. I think, she'll tell you that, and not in a terrible way, but she'll say, whenever I start to talk to you about something, you immediately go into problem solving mode. And she said, sometimes I just want to be heard. I just want you to listen to what I'm saying. And she said, but I can already see the wheels turning in your head of, how can I fix this for you? And she said, I don't always need you to fix things for me. And I don't always need you to spring into action. Sometimes I just want you to sit and listen to what I'm saying. And I think, we would be well served again, it's easy for me to sit here and kind of throw all these things out without having a lot of solutions. I mean, if I had all the solutions, I'd gladly share them. But I think we need to teach men how to be better listeners in relationships. I think we need to teach them how to be more open. I think we need to teach them that it's okay that they are scared to death of sexuality, because I think most of them are. So, a lot of this bravado and talk that we find in locker rooms is really just a fear being expressed out loud, and that's okay. And that's something, that when you have a girlfriend or you have a partner, that it's okay to talk about those anxieties and talk about your own feelings about sexuality and to listen carefully to the other person's feelings about it. So I think all of those things um, are skills that we can probably do some more work cultivating, not just with grown men. I mean, like I said, a lot of this stuff, um, a lot of this stuff I'm far from an expert on. A lot of it is just kind of being self-aware of mistakes that I make in my dealings with my wife and my daughter, and with my son, and mistakes that I have made that I have the benefit of, being 57 years old, and I can say to my students, listen, this is not. I'm not a genius. I learned this the hard way. I'm just letting you know that where I've had relationships and I've treated the woman in this kind of way, or I've made these kinds of mistakes, or I've said these kinds of things, it has not been good. And where I have gotten it right, boy, I have found those relationships with my wife, for example, when I get it right, I mean that your relationship there really soars when you listen and when you do the things that a good relationship needs.
Well, so Jonas, I feel obligated to tell you I'm in the same bucket, as you. My parents never spoke to me about anything regarding intimacy or relationships, whether they be good or bad. And I was very deficient with that with my three daughters as well. And now I go around to schools and speak about topics that I never imagined myself, speaking about. Um, but the one thing that I always found interesting in speaking to boys, and maybe this is something, you can even I think it's a safe one with your parents, is I love telling boys when I meet them, um, the rush that I felt when I held my wife's hand the first time,
Mm,
and asking young people, "Have you heard the story about how your parents met or how your dad felt the first time that he asked mom to go out on a date and she said yes, right? And getting these things, right? Because the one thing I love about talking about consent is going back to the Latin roots, which means feel with someone. And and it's so easy to just let people know if you ever wonder what the heck consent is, just go back to the Latin roots of feeling with someone. That means you know the
uh-huh.
person, that you have a conversation going. You're being solicitous to what their feelings are. It's a two-way, street. And I do agree with you 1,000%. We actually have a slide, John, that talks about the bare minimum and building diversity in our community spaces, educating people on consent, engaging our boys. That's just the bare minimum, right? And we should be, and I love the fact that you are aspiring to bring and lift the boys up to the best versions that they can be. And I feel very blessed that we've had this time together. I know we've gone past our usual allotment of time, and I feel like we could have multiple,
We go on for
multiple
hours. Yeah. Yeah.
conversations on this, John. And this is a audio podcast. We will show some clips on social media so people can see, who we're talking about. But John, what I also love is talking to someone who looks like I'm older. I'm 61. So one of my childhood heroes was a linebacker for the Chicago Bears. I don't know if anyone has ever said you have some inkling of looks there, but you have the the looks of an old school linebacker from the NFL. And hearing someone speak with the clarity and the vulnerability and the emotion that you speak is I can only imagine how many young men you are touching with your work. So very grateful for the work that you're doing because it's much needed. And so grateful for you being generous with your time with us tonight.
Well, I'm grateful also, Alex. And again, I don't want to just to flatter you, but like I said, when I was so blown away by when you came in and the work that I Have a Right is doing is so on target and so needed. I'm so grateful for the work you're doing. I hope you can continue to grow the work. I mean, if we could get you into speaking to every teenage boy in America, I think that would be a value added in terms of getting us to the place that we need to be. So I want to thank you for the work that you're doing. I know it came from a place of that maybe you would not have thought of when you were 25 years old. I mean, it started from a place that was difficult for you, but talk about hazards that forward. I mean, you've taken something that for you and your family, and especially for your daughter, has been an obstacle, and you've turned it into a way of educating other people. So I'm grateful for that work that your organization's doing.
Well, somehow I think, John, we're going to find ways to collaborate going forward because I've just thoroughly enjoyed
Yeah, I'd love
everything
to do it.
about this. Okay, excellent. And Jonas, thank you for
Yeah, thanks, Jonas. Good
being with
luck.
us this evening.
Of course, this has been a great conversation, and I've really
Good
learned
luck
a
with your
lot.
final exams down in Delaware.
Thank you. Yeah, one more. So at the
All right,
finish line.
perfect.
Thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcasts on all platforms. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends about Aspire. Follow us on social media at I Have the Right To. Learn more about our student and executive programming at our website at ihavetherightto.org.